The U.S. Valiant streaked through the inky void of deep space, its hull shimmering under the distant light of alien suns. A sleek exploration vessel, the Valiant was 5 years into a 10-year mission of discovery, charting uncharted regions of the galaxy and seeking out new forms of life. Captain Nora Vance stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the swirling nebulae and twinkling star systems displayed on the large viewscreen. It had been a quiet few months, and the crew was restless, yearning for some excitement. Little did they know their lives were about to change forever. "Captain, I'm picking up a distress signal," Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka reported from the comm station, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's faint, but definitely artificial in origin." Translating now. Vance turned to Tanaka, her curiosity piqued. In all their travels, the Valiant had never encountered another spacefaring civilization. Protocol dictated investigating any distress calls, but they were far from home, and backup was light years away. She pondered for a moment, then nodded. "Put it on speakers, Lieutenant." An urgent voice burst through the bridge, speaking in a musical alien tongue. Though the universal translator rendered the words in English, the fear and desperation were plain to hear. "Under heavy attack. Cannot hold out much longer. Begging for any assistance. Coordinates to follow. Please help." The signal abruptly cut out, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Vance exchanged glances with her XO, Commander Travis Sato. His normally relaxed demeanor had hardened into resolve. He knew what she was thinking. "Helm, lay in a course to the source of that signal. Best possible speed," Vance ordered, her voice ringing with decisiveness. "Tactical, raise shields and charge weapons, just in case. All hands, yellow alert." Keying the ship-wide comms, she addressed her crew. "This is the captain. We've detected what appears to be a distress call from an unknown alien civilization. As the only Confederation ship in charted range, it is our duty to respond and offer any aid we are able. I know this is an unexpected development in our mission, but I have faith in each and every one of you. Stay sharp and stand ready." Vance out. As the crew rushed stations and the Valiant leaped into warp, Seto turned to Vance, his eyes glinting with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. "Are you sure about this, Nora? We're a long way from home. There's no telling what we're warping into." "You know the regs, Travis. We don't have a choice. Someone's calling for help, and we're in a position to answer." Vance replied steadily, but deep down, a niggling doubt warmed in her gut. The galaxy was vast and full of terrors. What horrors awaited them? As if in answer, the Valiant dropped out of warp a short time later on the edge of a star system flickering with the telltale flashes of battle. Scanners showed wreckage from unknown vessels littering the void and energy signatures of weapons fire crisscrossing in the planet's low orbit. "Take us in, Mr. Virtus. Nice and easy. Passive scans only, no active sensors. Let's not spook them," Vance instructed, gripping the arms of her command chair. The Valiant moved forward cautiously, silently gathering data of the ongoing space battle. 2 distinct types of alien ships were engaged in a vicious dogfight. The first, larger vessels were elegant, almost organic-looking, with smooth hulls and flowing lines. But many were burning or broken, their graceful forms shattered by weapons fire. In contrast, their attackers were angular, gunmetal gray monstrosities bristling with vicious-looking cannons and spikes. They swarmed the larger alien ships like sharks in a feeding frenzy, pounding their quarry with relentless salvos. Scans indicate the larger vessels are the source of the distress signal. Their power and propulsion signatures are fluctuating wildly. "They can't take much more, Captain," Chief Engineer Lena Sorensen reported from her engineering console, her face grim. Vance knew they couldn't just sit back and watch an alien species be slaughtered, but she had her orders and her crew to consider. Rushing headlong into an unknown conflict was beyond reckless. She was still wrestling with the decision when a large chunk of a ruined alien ship came hurtling directly for the Valiant, the result of a violently destructive energy torpedo. "Incoming debris. Brace for impact. Helmsman Calvertes yelled, frantically working to evade. But it was too late. The Valiant shook violently as the jagged wreckage slammed into their shields, alarms shrieking across the bridge. Vance was hurled from her chair, sparks erupting from overloaded EPS conduits. Damage report. Saito shouted over the chaos, helping a dazed Vance back to her feet. She waved off his concern, head throbbing as she staggered back to her seat. Shields down to 60%. Minor hull breaches on decks 12 and 13. Emergency force fields in place. Warp drive and long-range comms are offline. Sorensen rattled off, rapidly triaging the damage. Vance cursed under her breath. In trying to stay out of the battle, they'd blundered right into it. And now the flash of their shields absorbing the impact had drawn the attention of the attacking alien craft. A cluster of the ugly metallic ships peeled off from their main assault, speeding directly for the Valiant. Incoming hostiles. They're locking weapons. Tactical Officer Lieutenant Lingming warned, hands poised over the weapon controls. Orders. Vance knew the next few seconds would determine the fate of her ship and crew. The Valiant was never meant for heavy combat. Their shields and weapons no match for dedicated warships. Trying to fight would be suicide. Get our shields back up as quickly as you can, and hail those ships. Broadcast we're a peaceful Confederation vessel, not part of this conflict. She commanded, mind racing for options. 10 seconds passed as the enemy ships closed in, their weapons glowing with deadly intent. Vance held her breath, praying their message got through. Just as the tactical console squealed a lock-on warning, the hostiles suddenly veered off, banking hard and boosting back towards the main battle. A ragged cheer erupted across the Valiant's bridge, the crew sagging in relief. They'd avoided destruction by the skin of their teeth, but Vance knew their reprieve was momentary at best. The ship shuddered again, an ominous groan echoing from deep within its hull. Sorensen looked up from her diagnostic readouts, face ashen. Captain, that last hit damaged our antimatter containment fields. We have a leak in the reactor core. If I can't get it locked down. She didn't need to finish the sentence. A breach of their antimatter stores would vaporize the Valiant in a heartbeat. Vance slammed a fist on her intercom panel. Bridge to engineering. Lena, do whatever you have to do to stabilize that leak. Pull power from any non-essential systems. We just need to hold together long enough to get out of here. Cutting the comms, she turned back to the raging space battle, jaw clenched with determination. They'd stumbled into a nightmare, but she'd be damned if she let it claim her ship and crew. Yet as the Valiant limped away from the carnage, sheltering behind the pitted bulk of a ruined alien ship to make emergency repairs, Vance found her thoughts drawn back to the desperate plea for help still echoing in her mind. They may have escaped destruction by the hostile forces, but what about the aliens who had begged for their aid? Could the Valiant really slink away while the species faced annihilation? As the cries of the wounded alien ships and the ruthlessness of their attackers played out on the view screen, Vance wrestled with the weight of command, knowing her next decision could change the face of the galaxy forever. The Valiant had awoken to a universe at war. There could be no going back to the life they knew before. The only question was how they'd face this brave new reality. With a heavy heart, Vance keyed the shipwide intercom, the eyes of every crewman on the Valiant looking to her for guidance and hope. This is the captain. There's no easy way to say this, but it's clear we found ourselves witness to a conflict and a tragedy beyond imagining. The Valiant floated in the shadow of the ruined alien ship, its crew working frantically to seal the antimatter leak and restore shields. On the bridge, Captain Vance and her senior officers watched sickbay reports stream in, detailing the wounds suffered during their jarring entry into the war zone. So far, the injuries were minor. Cuts, bruises, and a few cases of smoke inhalation. But Vance knew their luck could change at any moment. Her decision to pause their escape and render aid weighed heavily on her conscience. Every instinct screamed at her to warp out of the system before the hostile ships returned, to carry news of this conflict back to Confederation High Command. But in her heart, she knew running wasn't an option, not while the aliens who sent that desperate plea were still out there, fighting for their lives. Sato leaned in, his voice low. "Nora, I'm with you on helping those unknowns, but we have to face facts. The Valiant isn't a battleship. A few more hits like that last one, and we're space dust." Vance's jaw clenched, eyes never leaving the command screen and the chilling sensor feeds of the distant battle. "What would you have me do, Travis? Warp out and leave them to die? We're the only ones who can help." Before Sato could respond, a chime from comms interrupted, making them both start. Tanaka looked up sharply from his console, surprise etched on his features. "Captain, we're being hailed. It's coming from the central ship in the alien fleet." Vance shared a charged look with Sato, then stood tall, squaring her shoulders. On screen, the bridge fell silent as the view screen flickered, and a shimmering blue alien came into focus. Unlike the hostile race the Valiant had encountered, this being was slender, almost elfin, with large silver eyes and delicate features. It was clearly wounded, a thin trickle of glowing cerulean blood staining its high-necked tunic. "I am Supreme Commander Talon of the Zorgan Defense Fleet," the alien said, their words translated into lilting Federation standard. "Your ship appeared in the midst of our battle with the Craxian forces. Though you attempted to evade, your vessel has sustained damage. We have precious little to spare, but will render any assistance we can in thanks and recompense." Vance stepped forward, mind racing to parse the incredible fact that she was talking to a completely unknown race. "I'm Captain Nora Vance of the U.S. Valiant. We're explorers from the Terran Confederation. We picked up your distress call and came to help, but were pulled into the conflict before we could announce ourselves." Talon inclined their head somberly. "You have our deepest gratitude, Captain Vance. As you've seen, we're fighting for our very survival against the Craxian Empire. They caught us unprepared, and our losses have been catastrophic. I fear if the battle continues to run against us, this will be the Zorgan's final stand." A flash of understanding passed between Vance and Sato. The Valiant had awoken to a desperate war for survival, with nothing less than the existence of an entire alien species hanging in the balance. Humanity had dreamed of and dreaded such a moment for generations, pondering the fateful first contact with intelligent life amongst the stars. Now, in the blood and fire of a distant alien system, that theoretical question had become a brutal reality. "Supreme Commander, the Valiant and her crew are at your disposal," Vance replied, not a flicker of hesitation in her voice. "We can begin transporting your wounded aboard immediately, and our engineers will assist in repairs to your ships. I will not let the Zorgan people fall, not when we have the power to help." She flicked her eyes to meet the gazes of her bridge officers one by one. Seeing only determined nods, they were with her. Even in the shimmering depths of the holofeed, the naked relief and gratitude on Talon's angular face was devastating to behold. "Then the Zorgan owe you a debt we can never repay, Captain Vance of the Valiant. You have the thanks of my people, and my personal oath that we will stand with you against the Craxian, to the very end. This system will be the birthplace of our new alliance or a shared grave for both our kinds." The weight of those words settled over the Valiant's bridge, heavy as neutronium. Vance drew in a steadying breath, then raised a hand in a crisp Terran salute. "To our shared battle, then, Supreme Commander." As the comm feed cut out, she turned to her crew, a feverish light in her eyes. "Yellow alert. Get those shield generators back online on the double. Ready arms lockers A through D for an infantry loadout. Have Doc Patel prep sickbay for alien casualties. Brief her to expect anything." Sato blanched at the implications. "We're going in. Nora, the Valiant barely scraped by last time." Vance rounded on him, voice ringing like steel across the bridge. "You heard Talon. Without our help, the Zorgan are done for. We committed the moment we answered their distress call." Seeing the uneasy looks from her bridge officers, she raised her voice, projecting the conviction that had made her the youngest captain in the fleet. "I know this isn't what we trained for, First contacts aren't supposed to happen in the middle of pitched battles with hostile third parties. But we're here now, and the Valiant is all that stands between the Zorgon and oblivion. Whatever comes, we'll face it like we always have. As a crew, as Terrans, let's bring our A-game people and show these Craxians what happens when you mess with humanity's friends. A beat of startled silence, then the bridge erupted in fierce cheers and yells of affirmation. Vance nodded fiercely, then strode back to her command chair, adrenaline surging through her veins. She triggered the fleet-wide comm, connected now to the tattered remnants of the Zorgon Armada thanks to Tanaka's quick comms patch. Zorgon ships, this is Captain Vance. Form up on the Valiant. We'll take point. Concentrate your fire on the Craxian flagship. We need to cut the head off the snake. Let's show these bastards what our races can do when we stand together. Damaged, leaking atmosphere and wreathed in crackling blue energy, the Valiant soared from concealment with the Zorgon fleet at its back, charging directly for the seething Craxian Armada. Vance's hands gripped her chair arms with white-knuckled intensity as the range to the enemy ships ticked down, weapons locked squealing mornings. Steady as she goes helm. Not 1 inch of give. Tactical, ready a full spread of quantums and hold for my mark. The Valiant shook as the first ranging shots from the Craxian ships spattered against their weakened shields, the enemy fleet rushing to meet the unexpected challenge. Sato braced himself against the trembling deck plates, meeting Vance's blazing gaze across the bridge. Hell of a time to try out joint strike ops for the first time. She bared her teeth in a feral smile, the fire of battle burning away any trace of doubt or fear. The Craxians wanted war. Let's show them what it means to fight humans. The Valiant thundered into the teeth of the enemy fleet, the first bolts of its quantum torpedoes blazing from its launch tubes and arcing into the hulls of the closest Craxian ships. The alliance between the lost children of Earth and an alien race on the brink of destruction had been forged, and the Craxians were about to learn the terrible cost of underestimating humanity's courage. The U.S. Valiant shuddered violently as a barrage of Craxian fire hammered into its dorsal shields, the force enough to slam unbraced crew members to the deck. On the bridge, warning alarms shrilled and emergency lights flashed an angry crimson. Captain Nora Vance never took her eyes off the main view screen, jaw clenched as she watched the battered Zorgon fleet struggling to reform around the Valiant's lead. Shields at 20%. Lieutenant Li Ming shouted over the din of battle, hands flying over her TAC console. We can't take another hit like that. Vance leaned forward, a trickle of blood running from a cut on her forehead. Reroute power from secondary systems, and get me a firing solution on that Craxian dreadnought. The view screen flared actinic white as a Zorgon cruiser off the Valiant's starboard flank took a devastating series of hits, its angular hull crumpling under the onslaught before it ruptured completely in a boil of escaping atmosphere and debris. Vance felt each loss like a physical blow, a hollowness growing in her stomach. For all their courage and defiance, the Galactic alliance was outgunned and outmatched. The Valiant had caught the Craxians off guard with their initial charge, but that advantage had rapidly waned as the enemy fleet shifted to engulf them like a tightening noose. We need to do something drastic, or this is going to be a very short fight. Commander Travis Sato grated out, bracing himself as another impact rocked the bridge. I'm open to ideas, XO. Vance snapped, mind racing. The Craxian ships seemed to shrug off even direct hits from the Valiant's cannons, and a glance at the TAC readouts showed their torpedoes rapidly dwindling. Suddenly, the comm chirped, Tanaka hunching over his station. Captain, incoming hail from the Zorgon flagship. On screen. Vance ordered, praying it wasn't to inform her of Supreme Commander Talon's demise. To her relief, Talon's shimmering blue form appeared, their delicate features contorted in pain, but undeniably alive. Captain Vance, our scans show the Valiant is taking severe damage. Your sacrifice is immeasurable, but I cannot ask you to throw your lives away for us. Vance shook her head fiercely. We're not done yet, Supreme Commander. But I need options. Your people have fought the Craxians before. There must be a way to even the odds. Talon's expression flickered, a warring mix of fear, desperation, and fragile hope. There may be a chance. We've located their staging base on the far side of the system's asteroid belt. It's heavily shielded, but if we could get a team inside to sabotage their sensor grid and knock out their communications hub, it might give us the opening we need. Vance glanced at Sato, a wordless communication passing between them. He gave a sharp nod, already rising to his feet. I'll lead the strike team myself. Have your best ready to drop in 5. Vance swallowed hard, the weight of command pressing down on her like a vice. Sending her people into the unknown on a Hail Mary mission made her soul ache, but the brutal calculus of their situation was undeniable. They'd all burn together if something didn't change. She locked eyes with Sato, a man who'd been her friend long before he became her XO. Bring them home, Travis, and light a fire under those Craxian bastards they won't soon forget. He clasped her arm, his grip strong and sure. Aye, Captain. We'll get it done. With a final nod, he strode off the smoky bridge, a squad of grim-faced Valiant security officers falling in behind him. Vance turned back to Talon, fresh determination burning in her gaze. Give us the coordinates and get ready to punch through their lines the moment those shields drop. It's time we took this fight to the enemy. The strike team materialized inside the Craxian base in a flare of golden transporter energy, weapons already up and seeking targets. The staging ground was a seething hive of activity, Craxian soldiers rushing to their battle stations and damaged ships limping in to rearm. Sato and his people charged forward, cutting down the first soldiers who moved to block them with tight phaser bursts. At his side, Zorgan Commander Velnak led his own warriors, their slender blue forms graceful and deadly as they scythed into the enemy with crackling energy glaives. Together, the human and Zorgan soldiers fought their way deeper into the base, a tide of desperate fury even the most battle-hardened Craxians couldn't long withstand. Sato ducked and rolled under a spray of return fire, coming up in a crouch to snap off shots from his rifle. Velnak, where's that control hub? The Zorgan officer vaulted over a shattered barricade, landing lightly at Sato's side. 50 mecrons ahead, but the Craxians will have it heavily guarded. Sato gave a predator smile, ramming a fresh power pack into his rifle. Then we'll hit them like they've never been hit before. Let's go introduce them to the alliance they wanted so badly. With a roar of challenge, the strike team surged forward, crashing through the enemy defenses with the inexorable fury of a tidal wave. Craxian forces broke and ran before their onslaught, unable to stand against the combined fury of human and Zorgan warriors. In the heart of the Craxian base, Sato and Velnak stormed into the communications hub, opening fire on the banks of equipment with grim purpose. As explosions ripped through the chamber and the Craxian comms network collapsed in a cascade of failing systems, they shared a fierce grin of triumph. The enemy advance would flounder, at least for a time. They'd bought the fleet a chance. High above, on the bridge of the Valiant, a ragged cheer went up as the Craxian shields flickered and died, the dreadnoughts suddenly vulnerable. Vance leaned forward in her command chair, a wolf's smile on her lips. All ships, this is Captain Vance. The enemy is exposed. Concentrate all fire on the central dreadnought. Let's cut their head off and end this once and for all. The Valiant lunged forward like an avenging angel, the battered remnants of the Zorgan fleet at its side. Lances of searing phaser fire and blistering torpedo spreads reached out to engulf the Craxian flagship, joined by a hurricane of the powerful particle beams from the Zorgan cruisers. Caught off guard and suddenly bereft of the swarm of support ships that normally guarded its flanks, the dreadnought shuddered under the blistering assault, its shields straining and then splintering entirely under the onslaught. A final spread of quantum torpedoes from the Valiant tore open its unprotected hull from stem to stern, and the massive ship broke apart, spewing bodies and debris into the void. A moment of stunned silence filled the bridge. Then Lieutenant Ming let out a whoop of pure elation. Their flagship is destroyed. The Craxian fleet is scattering. Vance sagged back in her chair, scarcely able to believe it. Against all odds, the Valiant and its newfound allies had snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. The Craxians were on the run, their advance halted in the face of the indomitable human spirit and the courage of a species pushed to the brink. As the crew began to cheer and embrace one another, the reality of their triumph sinking in, Vance allowed herself a small, fierce smile. The battle was won. But the war for the future of the Zorgon, and perhaps the Federation itself, had only begun. The Valiant's mission had changed irrevocably. Where once they had been explorers, now they were soldiers, thrust onto the front lines of a cosmic struggle with the highest possible stakes. Vance rose from her chair, wincing slightly from her wounds, but tall and unbowed. "Stand down from battle stations. Get me a damage report and casualty lists, and tell the transporter room to get our strike team back on board." She looked out at the sea of shining. Determined faces turned to her for guidance and leadership, feeling a swell of humbled pride. "We did the impossible today. We showed the Craxians, the Zorgon, and the whole damn galaxy what humanity is made of. And we're just getting started." The crew erupted into renewed cheers, fists pumping the air and feet stamping the deck. In that moment, battered but unbroken, the Valiant's crew had never felt more alive or more human. They had been tested in the crucible of war and emerged stronger, united in purpose and tempered by adversity. The Craxians had sown the wind. Now, with the Valiant at the vanguard, they would reap the whirlwind. In the aftermath of the Valiant's daring strike against the Craxian staging base, an uneasy calm settled over the war-torn system. The scattered remnants of the enemy fleet had limped back to their territory, leaving the shattered Zorgon homeworld and its haggard defenders to count the cost of their bitter victory. On the bridge of the Valiant, Captain Nora Vance surveyed the redouts grimly, taking in the depressingly long lists of damaged systems and casualty reports. They'd bloodied the Craxian's nose and bought crucial breathing room, but the advanced battleship was in rough shape. Main power was holding steady, but by the thinnest of margins, the warp core strained to its limits. Their torpedo complement was completely expended, phasers were at half charge, and hull breaches on multiple decks were being held back by nothing more than emergency force fields and the grim determination of Lieutenant Commander Sorensen's damage control teams. The price of turning the tide had been high, and the worst part was Vance knew it had likely only delayed the inevitable. The Craxians would regroup, reinforce their numbers from the fleets occupying the systems they'd already overrun, and come howling back for blood. The brief window of advantage the Valiant had seized for the Zorgon by sabotaging the enemy advance would slam shut all too soon. Rubbing eyes sore from exhaustion and stress, Vance left the command chair to pace the bridge, hands clasped tightly behind her back. As she passed the ops station, a flash of light on Lieutenant Commander Sato's console caught her eye. She paused, frowning slightly as she tried to make sense of the dense Craxian script crawling across the readout. "What am I looking at, Travis?" Sato glanced up, his normally lighthearted expression pulled into hard lines of concentration and worry. "Data we pulled from the Craxian systems during the raid on their base. Sensor logs, ship locations, deployment patterns. I'm running it through the decryption matrix now, but look at this." He pointed at a cascading list of numbers that meant little to Vance's untrained eye, but had clearly grabbed his attention. "If I'm reading this right, and I pray to all the gods I'm not, those are Craxian reinforcement fleet designations, and if this is accurate..." He swallowed hard, a muscle jumping in his jaw. "We hurt them, Nora, but not nearly enough. They got at least 3 full battle groups inbound, and they'll be here within 2 days. We stopped their first advance cold, but this, against those kinds of numbers, the Zorgon don't stand a chance." Vance went still, a chill settling into her bones like interstellar frost. A sick certainty rose in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't breathe around it. She'd led her ship, her crew, into the teeth of this nightmare to save an alien race from extinction, and in so doing had placed them all on the same gallows as the Zorgon. There could be no retreat now, no escape. They would fight, and they would die, together, so very far from home. Drawing in an unsteady breath, she gave Sato's shoulder a tight squeeze, feeling the tension corded in the muscles under her hand. Get that data to Supreme Commander Talon immediately. They need to see this. Sato nodded grimly, already coding the transmission. Vance turned away and strode into her ready room, needing a moment of solitude to grapple with the enormity of what they faced. The doors had barely hissed shut behind her before she braced her hands on her desk, head bowed as if under an intolerable weight. They were out of time, out of options. The Valiant was in no shape for another pitched battle, and the Zorgon fleet was barely holding itself together. If the Craxian reinforcements were allowed to join the fight, it would all be over. 1 billion Zorgon lives snuffed out, her ship and crew reduced to cooling debris in an uncaring cosmos. Unacceptable. Humanity had not clawed its way to the stars, had not bested the constraints of physics and the gulfs between worlds, only to watch another sapient species burn when they had the power to stand against it. Unconsciously, her fingers drifted to the high collar of her uniform, tracing the raised edges of her rank insignia, and the weight of the oath those 4 pips represented. Vance had never dreamed, growing up on the rugged mining outpost of Ta City IV, that she would one day hold the lives of so many in her hands, that the decisions she made, here and now, would shape the very future of the galaxy. But if the Valiant was to be the fulcrum upon which that immense lever turned, she would not flinch from it. Jaw clenching with new resolve, she strode back onto the bridge, every eye turning to her with that peculiar mix of hope and trust that never failed to steal her breath. She retook the command chair, keying the fleet-wide comm. "This is the captain. All department heads report to the briefing room in 10 minutes. Talon, if you're receiving this, I need to speak with you and your senior staff immediately." Drawing in a steadying breath, she met the gazes of her bridge crew with calm, unflinching resolve. The strategic situation has changed. We're out of time and nearly out of options, but we're not done, not by a long shot. She stood tall, feeling the thrum of the Valiant's engines through the soles of her boots and the beat of her own heart in her ears. It's time we took this war to the Craxians. It's time we lit the spark that will set the galaxy ablaze. No more reacting, no more hiding. If this is to be our last stand, we will make it one for the ages. The words rang in the sudden silence of the bridge, heavy with meaning and the gravity of the moment. Then, as one, her crew erupted into fierce shouts of affirmation and support, fists slamming terminals and looks of grim, fatalistic determination settling over young faces. Vance drank in the sight of them, fixing it forever in her memory. The Valiant might fall. They might all, every last soul aboard, pay the ultimate price for their conviction, but it would not be in vain. If they could strike one true blow, if they could show the Craxians that even in the face of overwhelming odds and the cold equations of war, there was a line humanity would never allow crossed. The lives of an entire species snuffed out in cruelty and aggression. Then perhaps, even in death, they might change the face of the cosmos for generations to come. With a last nod to her crew, Vance strode from the bridge towards the briefing room, already running through contingencies and battle plans in her mind. All her life she had prepared for this, honing her skills and sharpening her mind for the day when she would be called to spend them in defense of all she held dear. That long, dark night had come at last, and woe betide any who sought to stand against her. No price was too high, no sacrifice too great. The Valiant would strike like the fist of an avenging god into the black heart of the Craxian war machine. Let the enemy tremble, for they had sown the whirlwind, and now they would wreak the wrath of humanity ascendant. The galaxy would never be the same. The U.S. Valiant hung in space, a battered, scorched guardian standing vigil over the ravaged Zorgon homeworld. On the bridge, Captain Nora Vance stared at the viewscreen with haunted eyes, scarcely able to comprehend the devastation spread out before her. They had done it. Against all odds, against every projection and every grim statistic, the Valiant and its improbable Zorgan allies had brought the Craxian war machine to its knees. But the cost had been unimaginable. In the desperate days following the discovery of the inbound Craxian reinforcement fleets, Vance and her crew had thrown themselves into a frenzy of preparations, jury-rigging repairs, running endless battle drills, scouring the Zorgan databases for any scrap of information that might give them an edge in the coming storm. They had reached out to the beleaguered Zorgan government, pleading for the resources and support needed to make their last stand a true chance at victory, rather than a defiant but doomed gesture. But the response from Zorgan High Command had been a frustrating mix of hedging and hesitation. Reeling from their losses and paralyzed by the sheer scope of the crisis, the Zorgan leadership had balked at committing their last reserves to what they saw as a hopeless battle. They spoke of evacuation, of retreat to the inner systems, as if there could be any safe haven from the ravages of the Craxians. Vance had nearly screamed in frustration, watching their chances dwindle with every moment of political infighting and cowardice. In the end, she and her XO Travis Seto had been forced to take matters into their own hands. In a series of daring raids and blitzkrieg strikes, the Valiant had stormed the Craxian supply lines, capturing much-needed ships and material. It had been a huge gamble, risking the very last of the Valiant's strength on missions that could so easily have drained away what little power they had left. But Vance had known with a bone-deep certainty that if they did not seize the initiative, if they allowed themselves to be paralyzed by fear and indecision, then all would be lost. And so they had rolled the dice, the sons and daughters of Earth hurling themselves into the fire with reckless abandon. And the Zorgan, shamed by the humans' indomitable courage, had rallied behind them. In ones and twos, then in squadrons and finally in proud fleets, they had risen up to stand with their human allies, ready to face the onrushing tide of Craxian ships and burn together in the defense of all they held dear. The battle, when it finally came, had been an apocalypse, the stuff of legends and nightmares. The Craxians had burst into the system like an avalanche of steel and fire, wave after wave of ships burning with the need to avenge their earlier defeats. They had descended on the Allied fleet like the wrath of angry gods, all sound and fury, and the promise of annihilation. But the Valiant and the Zorgan had met them head-on, screaming defiance into the teeth of the enemy advance. Vance had been everywhere in those fateful hours, rallying her crew, coordinating fire with the Zorgan line, pouring every iota of her will and tactical brilliance into the cauldron of war. The Valiant had danced a deadly weave through the maelstrom of battle, its weapons spitting fire and its shields shrugging off the worst the enemy could throw at it. And then, in the final, desperate minutes, when both fleets were shattered and burning, when all seemed lost, and the Craxians were poised for the kill, Vance and Seto had played their final card. In a daring, audacious gambit, they had taken the Valiant into the very heart of the enemy formation, closing to point-blank range and unleashing the full fury of their last remaining quantum torpedoes in a single devastating salvo. The resulting conflagration had been blinding, a star erupting in the heart of the Craxian fleet. Their heaviest ships, their proud dreadnoughts and battle wagons, had been ravaged by the detonations, hulls shattering like spun glass under the onslaught. In an instant, the spine of the Craxian war machine had been broken, their advance faltering as their strongest ships spanned and died in fire. The cost had been high. The Valiant, pushed far beyond its limits, had barely limped out of the inferno, its hull scorched and blackened, its crew decimated by the carnage. The Zorgan fleet had been reduced to a shadow of its former strength, proud ships turned to drifting wrecks and expanding clouds of molten metal. But they had won. Against all odds, against every projection and every grim statistic, the Valiant and its allies had shattered the Craxian invasion. The surviving enemy ships had fled, vanishing into the void to lick their wounds and ponder the bitter fruit of their aggression. Now, as the pyres of the dead cooled and the terrible tallies of the lost scrolled across every screen, Vance struggled to come to grips with the magnitude of what they had done. The Zorgan homeworld, scared but unbroken, would live to see another dawn. The Craxian Emperor's grand designs of conquest and genocide were in ruins, his fleets scattered and his armies broken. But the wounds ran deep, the trauma and the loss etched into the very fabric of the cosmos. The alliance between human and Zorgan, forged in the crucible of war, would not easily be forgotten. The scars left by the Craxians' brutality, and the sacrifices made to turn them back, would shape the destiny of both races for generations to come. Vance knew there would be repercussions, that the Confederation Council would not look kindly on a starship captain who had embroiled humanity in a galactic war without orders or authorization. But as she looked out over her battered ship, her battered crew, she could not find it in herself to regret a single choice. They had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of, the lengths they would go to in defense of the innocent and the oppressed. They had stood in the face of overwhelming odds and the cold equations of realpolitik, and had dared to say, no more, to light the spark that had set the stars ablaze with the fires of justice and retribution. Let the politicians and the pundits debate the wisdom of her actions. Let the historians pick over the bones of this moment and try to understand the choices that had led them here. All Vance knew was that when the clarion call had sounded, when the moment of truth had come, the Valiant and her crew had risen to meet it. They had stared into the abyss and had not blinked, had not faltered. And in so doing, they had changed the galaxy forever. The Craxians would think twice before raising their hand against another helpless race, knowing now the terrible cost of underestimating the children of Earth. The Zorgan would never again look at humanity as just another upstart species scrabbling in the galactic shallows, but as brothers and sisters in arms, comrades forged in the fire of war. There was still so much to do, so many battles left to fight. The Craxians were broken but not destroyed, and the scavengers and opportunists of 100 worlds were already circling, eager to feast on the carcass of the conflict. The galaxy would be a dangerous place in the days to come, as the old certainties crumbled and new powers rose to fill the void. The end.